Hi everybody, Kevin Lane here. It's time for Uncle Jonesy's Camera of the Week, and today we're going back to the USSR with my Zorki 1. Now, if you say, hey, I know what that is, that looks like a Leica 2, that's exactly right, because it is a Russian-made copy of the German Leica camera, the Leica 2 to be exact. Now, there's a great story behind this camera, and it's the biggest reason why I'm fascinated by it. I have an interest in historically important cameras, whether they're actually good cameras or not. It's fun to use cameras that have a story and history behind them, and that's why I have this one. Because, as you all know, in the early 1930s, Leica cameras were taking the photographic world by storm with 35 millimeter film and well-made craftsmanship body cameras and lenses that were as sharp as tack. But the only problem was that as relations between the Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union deteriorated, it became harder for those cameras to find their way into hands of the citizens of the Soviet Union. So the answer to that was for a factory in the Soviet Union to make copies of the Leica camera. And that factory was located in the Ukraine. And the factory was called the F.E. Dzerzhinsky Labor Commune. And Dzerzhinsky starts with the letter D, or whatever the Cyrillic letter is. It's an American or English D, F.E.D. And they called those cameras Fed cameras. But they were copies of Leica 2s. And they weren't very good copies. They were actually pretty crude. The workmanship wasn't there, the lens quality wasn't there, they were very unwieldy to use, but they served their purpose. They put these cameras into the hands of the Soviet Union citizens. Now, as the war progressed, the German army became a threat to this part of Ukraine where the Fed factory was, and so they had to close down the factory and move production of the Fed camera to another camera factory closer, or a machine making company closer to Moscow, and that was a company called KMZ. And they made the Fed cameras starting in 1947, 1948. And then, not too long after that, the Fed camera was moved back to their original factory, and when it was safe to go back there. But the KMZ factory near Moscow kept on making those Leica copies, and they marketed them under the name Zorki. And they were mostly made for export out of the Soviet Union to other parts of Europe. So this is what this is. It is a Zorki, and you can see there the engraving. Do you notice that it's also in English as well as Cyrillic? That's because this camera was made to be exported out of the Soviet Union. Now, it is, as I said, a copy of a Leica 2, which means it's 35 millimeter rangefinder camera, and like the Leicas, it has a separate viewfinder for your composition, the viewfinder, and then has a viewfinder for the rangefinder where you do your focusing. So it's a multi-step process when you're shooting. You look through the rangefinder and you line up your focus by turning the focus knob here on the lens, bringing your split image together, and then you move to the viewfinder on the right side, and you compose your shot, and then you fire your shot, and off you go. And the shutter, if I can let you hear it, sounded like that. Let's wind it again. Hear that? And it is a shutter curtain, a focal plane shutter, cloth, rubberized cloth shutter that has a range of bulb, and then goes from 1/20th of a second, 1/30th, 1/40th, 1/60th, 1/100th, 1/200th, and then stops at 1/500th of a second. All right, the lens is a copy of the Leica Elmar f3.5. All right, but it's more based on a Zeiss design, a Tessar lens, and there's no comparing the quality. It's not a Leica lens. You're not going to get anywhere near the same quality. In fact, you're going to have, if you have the sun anywhere from other than behind you, you're going to have problems with light flares. All right. So I told you that I have a story about this type of camera, and that is that in the late 80s, I actually owned a Leica 3, a Leica thread mount camera. I was, again, fascinated by the history, and I think a lot of that had to do with a book that I had read. I highly recommend it. It's called Glass, Brass, and Chrome, and it's the story of the 35 millimeter, the American 35 millimeter camera industry. But of course, that was all influenced by the cameras that came from Europe, in particular the Leica. And I remember seeing the picture of that camera, the Leica 3, and going, wow, that just so attractive. It's such a fine-looking piece of machinery. So I was able to get one, and it's because back in the late 1980s, they didn't cost that much. That's all changed now. They're much more expensive. And in 1994, my house was broken into, and that camera was stolen, and I never replaced it. So not too long ago, about maybe a couple of years ago, I saw an article that sang the praises of screw mount Leicas. And I did some investigation and found that I really wasn't comfortable spending the money on the actual Leicas, a genuine Leica. So I started looking into copies. And that's what led me to the Zorki. And this camera actually came from Shutter Brother Kelly for our Christmas mystery camera present a couple of years ago, which I think we've covered in our podcast and on the blog. Anyway, so I remember getting the camera and being so excited because I felt like I was picking up my old Leica again. It just fits my hands. When you collapse the lens, it would fit into, I could put it in my jean pocket in the back. I could put it into a jacket pocket. It's really a fun thing to carry around and use that way. So I took a trip with my wife to Savannah, and that was the first chance I had to use it. And I opened the bottom plate and took out the take-up spool, and you get your film, and this is a used canister, so that's why the film is cut off like that. But if I had a fresh roll, then you would have to trim the leader. You always have a little bit of leader at the end of the film, but you have to make more leader in these screw mount Leicas and in the screw mount Feds and Zorkis. And there are guides online as to how you cut it. I made my own guide. You can also just cut, I think, 20 sprocket holes and get the same thing, right? So you trim the leader, and then you take the film and the spool, and you pull out the leader, and you get it hooked onto the little catch here on the leader on the take-up spool. And then the hard part begins. You have to work this into the camera, work your film behind the box here where the path of the film goes. Work it in, slide it in, making sure that that leader is still not covering, there's no film covering the shutter, just that trimmed part of the leader. Then once you have that, you can fire the shutter, advance it a couple of times, put the bottom plate on, fire it a couple more times, set your counter, and you're ready to go. So I did all of that and went around shooting. But the first thing I noticed when I tried to load it, though, is that the 35 millimeter cassette would not fit in the chamber. I go, what? What is wrong here? I mean, it would not go in. I got it in. I forced it, but it was just crazy. Couldn't fit in. So I shot a roll of film and then wanted to put another roll of film, and then of course found out I couldn't get the cassette out. So I had to go back online and do some research, and I found that the early versions of the Zorki, they were meant to take a proprietary canister or cassette. That's because Kodak hadn't even invented the 135 canister yet. They came out in 1938 with Kodachrome. So you rolled your own film in a dark bag or a dark room into these cassettes, and you reused them. And that's the way 35 millimeter photography was back then. And I didn't, and those would fit in, but these modern cassettes didn't. So I started, when I got the camera back home, I started thinking about how I could solve this problem. And I got various tools, files, screwdrivers and things, and started just kind of filing the inside of the chamber to see if I could enlarge it. And I figured if I could just enlarge it a little bit, I could make this thing big enough for the cassette to go in. And sure enough, I've made it so that it fits in easier now. Look at that, right? It goes in. But still today, when you try to get it out, I have to resort to a pair of needle nose pliers, grab it, and then pull it out. Not fun. Not fun. So that's a problem. The other problem was when I developed the film, there were light leaks. And these are little pinholes. And of course that's because the shutter curtain had little pinholes in it, and that allowed the light leak in there. So, oh great. What am I going to do now? And the solution for that, also I found online, was to get some black fabric paint and take the lens off, which I did. And you probably can't see the shutter curtain because of the way I have the light set up. But I took a small paintbrush and I painted the shutter curtain and let it dry, and then painted another layer and let that dry. And I think I did 3 coats, let it dry, and then loaded some film in it and shot it again, and it worked. No more light leaks. And that's when I began to discover that if you are careful with your focus and you do all the good photography kind of things, like hold the camera still and don't shake it when you fire it, that you could actually get some pretty decent images with it. And in fact, you're seeing some images now that show the light leak, and you're also seeing what the camera can do when everything works on it. And it turns out that the copy, the Elmar copy, which is an Industar 22, is not a bad lens. It actually works pretty well if you have a good copy that's clean and no fungus and no scratches. You just have to watch out for, you'll get flares. So you got to make yourself a lens hood or keep the sun behind you, because you will definitely flare if you don't. So what about the future for this camera for me? I'm not sure. Maybe I'll go online and get one of those cassettes and load up some film in it. But I kind of hate that because I don't have any bulk rolls of color film, for one thing, and I kind of like the spontaneity of just going to the refrigerator and setting out some film, trimming the leader and putting it in and shooting it. And I can't do that with modern cassettes unless I find a way to make it fit. And so that's option 2, and that is to keep working that inside until I hollow it out, hoping I don't damage anything, and maybe I can get it so it will just slide in and slide out. Of course, the third option is I might sell it to someone who would like to have a go at it, because it's actually a fun camera to use. No light meter, so it gives me a chance to practice my Sunny 16 technique. You can be kind of stealth with it. You can sneak around and hide it. People don't know you're shooting, and then pull it out, and it's good for candid photography. And you put a aperture of f8 on there and work accordingly. You can be f8 and be there and get that street photography thing going on. But we'll see. I'll give you another report later on. Well, anyway, that is my report on the Zorki. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy this video and my rambling on, sorry about that. If you enjoyed this video, though, and you want to hear more, check out our other Cameras of the Week videos here on this YouTube channel. In fact, why don't you tap that subscribe button? That would be fantastic. And if you like to hear even more, please check out our podcast. It's Uncle Jonesy's Cameras Podcast, and it's available on all of your podcast sources. We also have a blog. It's unclejonesyscameras.blogspot.com. By the way, Jonesy's is spelled Jonesys. We take out the apostrophe. We have an Instagram and a Facebook page at UJC Podcast. You can find us there. And you can email us at unclejonesy'scameras@gmail.com, or just leave a comment right here on this YouTube video. We'll have another video next week. Hopefully Kelly and I can get together and make a podcast soon. We've been struggling with our schedule a bit, but I think things are going to happen one way or the other real soon. In the meantime, get your camera and get out there and capture some history or capture some moments with it, and be a photographer. Until next time, happy shooting, everybody.